Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The information presented in this broadcast, including all historical analysis of American television, sociological commentary, and discussions regarding the legal, financial, and emotional aspects of marital dissolution, is intended strictly for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. I am a researcher and an educator, not a licensed attorney, a certified financial planner, or a registered psychological therapist. The detailed discussions of family law, asset division, child custody historical trends, alimony, and women's legal rights do not constitute professional legal, financial, or medical advice. Family law and divorce statutes vary drastically from state to state across the United States, and historical precedents or past case studies do not reflect or determine current or future legal outcomes. Viewers are strongly advised and encouraged to consult with a qualified, board-certified legal professional, a fiduciary financial advisor, and a licensed mental health counselor in their specific jurisdiction before making any legally binding decisions, signing any documents, or taking action regarding separation or divorce. Please conduct your own extensive due diligence and prioritize your physical and legal safety above all else. Right now, sitting in your living room, your bedroom, or perhaps on the device in the palm of your hand, is the most effective psychological conditioning tool ever invented in human history, and it is highly likely that this very machine is the exact reason you are paralyzed by the thought of ending your marriage. Consider the staggering reality that by the end of the 1950s, a television set was present in nearly 90% of American households, broadcasting a meticulously crafted, highly sanitized, and entirely fictionalized version of the American nuclear family straight into the subconscious minds of millions of women. These black and white broadcasts did not just entertain, they established the invisible, suffocating baseline for what a successful woman was supposed to be. They taught your mothers, your grandmothers, and eventually you, that a woman's highest possible achievement was the maintenance of a serene domestic sphere, a smiling husband, and perfectly managed children. But behind the glowing screen of the television set, the legal reality for American women was a waking nightmare of financial subjugation and marital entrapment. We are about to uncover a deeply hidden code embedded in decades of American broadcasting that directly shaped the punitive family laws of the 20th century. More importantly, we are going to explore how understanding this very specific television programming is the exact psychological key required to dismantle the fear, the guilt, and the societal shame that is holding you back from filing those divorce papers today. To truly understand the modern landscape of divorce help for women, we must ruthlessly dissect the historical trends that built the trap. In the era of classic American sitcoms, the concept of a woman leaving her husband simply because she was unhappy, unfulfilled, or even emotionally abused was utterly absent from the public narrative. Television presented marital conflict as a minor, humorous misunderstanding that could be resolved in 22 minutes with a burnt pot roast and a patronizing laugh track. But outside of the broadcast signal, the legal system was brutally unforgiving. Prior to the sweeping legislative changes of the late 1960s and 70s, a woman could not simply request a divorce. The United States operated almost entirely under a fault-based divorce system. This meant that a woman seeking to dissolve her marriage had to legally prove, often in open court, that her husband had committed egregious acts such as verifiable adultery, extreme and prolonged physical cruelty, or total abandonment. If she could not provide concrete, undeniable proof of these specific faults, the state literally forced her to remain legally bound to her husband. Furthermore, the television narrative of the cared-for housewife completely masked the terrifying financial reality. Until the passage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974, a woman in the United States could be legally denied a credit card, a mortgage, or a business loan simply because of her gender, or because she did not have the signature of her husband. Women were financially infantilized by the law, while simultaneously being told by television that this dependency was the ultimate romantic ideal. The cognitive dissonance between the television screen and the brutal reality of the American courtroom created a generation of trapped women. When you consider historical case studies from the 1950s and 60s, you see women who were forced to hire private investigators to stage elaborate, sometimes perjured scenarios just to manufacture the legal grounds necessary to escape toxic, abusive, or simply dead-end marriages. The system required them to destroy their families publicly in order to save themselves privately. And even when they succeeded, they faced a society that had been trained by television programming to view the divorced woman as a tragic failure, a social pariah, or a dangerous homewrecker. It was not until 1969, when Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act in California, birthing the concept of the no-fault divorce, that the legal chains began to loosen. Yet, the psychological chains forged by decades of media consumption remained firmly intact. Even as television slowly began to introduce the concept of the divorced, independent woman in the 1970s and 80s, the underlying narrative often punished these characters, portraying them as overwhelmed, frantic, and inherently lacking the stability of a traditional two-parent home. You might be asking yourself why a deep dive into the historical sociology of American television broadcasting is relevant to the agonizing, very real legal battle you are facing in family court tomorrow, or the terrifying financial spreadsheet you are staring at tonight. It matters because the deeply internalized script you are playing out in your mind, the guilt you feel for wanting to break up your family, the terror you have about managing your own finances, the assumption that the legal system will inherently protect the primary breadwinner, was written by television executives and lawmakers 50 years ago. This masterclass is designed to systematically deprogram that societal conditioning. We are going to bridge the historical gap between the media you consumed and the brutal reality of modern family law, providing you with a comprehensive step-by-step educational framework to approach your divorce not as a personal failure, but as the strategic dissolution of a binding corporate contract. Throughout this extensive journey, we will analyze specific historical shifts in alimony and spousal support, examining how the transition from fault to no-fault divorce entirely changed the financial landscape for women, often leaving them impoverished if they were not strategically prepared. We will look at extensive historical trends in child custody, dissecting how the courts moved from the tender years doctrine, which historically favored mothers but trapped them in domestic roles, to the modern standard of the best interest of the child, which is frequently manipulated by well-funded spouses using litigation abuse. We will explore case studies of women who successfully navigated complex asset division, uncovering the forensic financial strategies necessary to locate hidden bank accounts, offshore trusts, and undisclosed investments that controlling partners often conceal. By examining the history of American television, we expose the exact origin of the biases that judges, mediators, and even your own legal counsel may subconsciously hold against you. We will replace the fairy tale of the perpetual housewife with hard data, actionable knowledge, and a profound understanding of your legal boundaries. You are going to learn how to compartmentalize your emotional trauma, assemble an unbreakable team of professionals, and execute a strategic exit plan that prioritizes your long-term financial survival and mental peace. This is about stripping away the decades of broadcasted propaganda that told you to stay quiet, stay smiling, and stay dependent, and replacing it with the absolute clarity required to reclaim your autonomy, protect your assets, and rewrite the trajectory of your own life. To understand the current legal landscape of 2026, we have to look back at the precise moment the broadcast signal changed. Imagine you are Sarah, a woman living in a major American city today. Sarah grew up watching reruns of mid-century sitcoms where every problem was solvable by a husband's firm handshake and a wife's supportive nod. But as Sarah navigates her own separation in 2026, she is realizing that the domestic tranquility she saw on screen was actually a legal cage constructed by the absence of no-fault legislation. In the world of Donna Reed and June Cleaver, the legal reality for a woman seeking to exit a marriage was almost entirely dependent on proving fault. If Sarah had lived in 1955, she would have had to prove her husband committed a specific, legally recognized sin. Historical trends show that without these proofs, the court could literally deny the divorce, effectively sentencing a woman to remain in a home where she was no longer welcome or safe. This brings us to the first major pillar of our masterclass: the historical transition from fault to no-fault divorce, and how it mirrors the television revolution of the 1970s. In 1970, The Mary Tyler Moore Show debuted, showing a woman who was not defined by her marriage, but by her career and her independence. This coincided almost perfectly with the rapid adoption of no-fault divorce laws across the United States. No-fault divorce meant that for the first time, a woman could cite irreconcilable differences. She no longer had to play the role of the victim of a specific crime to earn her freedom. However, this legal freedom came with a hidden financial cost that many women were unprepared for. While the television shows of the era celebrated the spunky single woman, they rarely discussed the fact that under no-fault laws, spousal support or alimony began to shift from a lifelong entitlement to a temporary rehabilitative measure. In our current year of 2026, many women still carry the psychological expectation that the legal system will provide a permanent safety net, similar to the endings of classic television dramas. But educational analysis of current case studies suggests a different reality. Today, the focus of the court is often on equitable distribution. To understand this, imagine the difference between how property was viewed in a show like I Love Lucy versus a modern legal proceeding. In the 1950s, property was often titled solely in the husband's name. If a divorce occurred, the woman was often left with nothing but what the husband chose to give or what the court strictly ordered. Today, equitable distribution means that the court looks at the marriage as a partnership. However, equitable does not always mean equal. Step by step, a woman in 2026 must approach her financial discovery like a forensic researcher. This is the second pillar: the educational audit of marital assets. Historical trends in family law indicate that the most common mistake women make during the initial stages of a divorce is failing to understand the distinction between separate property and marital property. Marital property generally includes everything acquired during the marriage, regardless of whose name is on the title. This includes retirement accounts, stock options, and even the appreciation of assets that one spouse might have owned before the wedding. Consider the case study of a woman we will call Jennifer. Jennifer and her husband had been married for 15 years. She had spent a decade out of the workforce to raise their children, much like the archetypal characters in classic suburban sitcoms. When the marriage began to dissolve, Jennifer assumed that because her husband's name was on the mortgage and the 401k, she had no claim to them. This is a common misconception rooted in the television-driven narratives of female dependency. In reality, in many jurisdictions, Jennifer was entitled to a significant portion of those assets because her contribution as a homemaker allowed the husband to build that wealth. This is what we call the recognition of non-monetary contributions. To prepare for this, one must move through a meticulous educational checklist. First, identify all sources of income. In 2026, this is more complex than just looking at a W-2 form. One must look for digital assets, cryptocurrency accounts, and secondary income streams from the gig economy. Second, collect at least 3 to 5 years of tax returns. These documents are the historical record of your financial life and are much harder to manipulate than a simple bank statement. Third, perform an inventory of all debts. In the 1970s, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was a massive step forward. But in 2026, many women still find themselves tethered to their spouse's bad credit decisions. One of the most profound shifts in American television history was the transition from the tender years doctrine to the best interest of the child standard. If you watch television from the early 20th century, the mother was almost always viewed as the natural, preferred caretaker of young children. This was the tender years doctrine. While it seemed favorable to women, it actually reinforced the idea that a woman's place was strictly within the home, and it often left them without the financial means to support those children. As we moved into the 1980s and 90s, television began to show more complex family dynamics, such as Kramer versus Kramer, reflecting the legal shift toward joint custody. In 2026, the potential outcomes for child custody are highly focused on the concept of the parenting plan. This is a detailed step-by-step document that outlines exactly how the children will spend their time, how decisions regarding education and healthcare will be made, and how disputes will be resolved. It is no longer about winning or losing the children. It is about creating a functional two-household system. Educational data shows that the more detailed and specific a parenting plan is, the less likely the parties are to return to court for future litigation. The psychological impact of television cannot be overstated when it comes to the fear of the courtroom. Shows like Law & Order or various courtroom dramas depict a high-stakes, aggressive environment where one person is destroyed and the other is vindicated. In reality, the vast majority of modern divorces are settled through mediation or collaborative law. These are processes where the goal is to reach an agreement without a judge making the final decision. Potential outcomes in mediation are often more flexible and creative than what a judge can order in a strictly legal setting. Imagine if you could negotiate a settlement that allowed you to stay in the family home until your youngest child graduated high school, in exchange for a smaller share of a retirement account. A judge might not have the authority to make such an order, but in a collaborative setting, these types of solutions are common. This is the third pillar: the strategic shift from litigation to negotiation. It requires a woman to move from the role of a television character waiting for a script to be written for her, to the role of a producer who is actively shaping the outcome of her own story. However, even with the best preparation, there is a shadow that looms over many high-asset divorces: the concept of marital waste or the intentional dissipation of assets. This is where a spouse begins to spend marital funds on things that do not benefit the marriage, such as gambling, expensive gifts for a third party, or even just hiding cash in overseas accounts. This was a plot point in many 1980s soap operas, but in 2026, the tools to track this have become incredibly sophisticated. Educational research into financial forensics shows that digital footprints, from ride-sharing apps to credit card metadata, make it increasingly difficult for a spouse to hide these behaviors. But what happens when the digital trail goes cold? And how does the history of American television help us predict the next move of a spouse who is trying to leverage the legal system against you? We have analyzed the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but the 1980s introduced a new archetype: the high-powered executive wife who faced an entirely different set of legal and social hurdles. In the next part, we will dive into the aggressive financial tactics of the 80s and 90s, and how the rise of the prenuptial agreement changed the game for the American woman forever. We will examine how to decode a spouse's sudden change in spending habits, and why your television habits from 20 years ago might be giving you a false sense of security in the modern boardroom of family law. The television landscape of the 1980s completely shattered the serene domestic illusion of the 1950s. We collectively traded the quiet, perfectly manicured suburban kitchen for the cutthroat, glass-enclosed corporate boardroom. Shows dominated by towering skyscrapers, oversized shoulder pads, and ruthless corporate takeovers introduced the American public to a completely new kind of marital warfare. For the very first time, television explicitly demonstrated how extreme wealth and corporate power could be weaponized within a family unit. This specific era of broadcasting birthed the cultural archetype of the aggressive financial divorce, where assets were dramatically hidden in offshore accounts, shell companies were created overnight to obscure wealth, and the prenuptial agreement was introduced to the mainstream public, not as a practical financial planning tool, but as a malicious weapon of absolute control. If you grew up absorbing these specific narratives, your subconscious understanding of a high-asset divorce is likely heavily dramatized and, more dangerously, fundamentally incorrect for navigating the legal reality of 2026. Imagine if you are Jessica, a mid-level executive living in Chicago today in 2026. 10 years ago, right before marrying her fiercely ambitious spouse, Jessica signed a prenuptial agreement. Because her understanding of prenups was heavily shaped by 1990s television dramas where a signed piece of paper meant a loyal wife was immediately left utterly destitute on the street, Jessica is currently terrified to initiate separation proceedings. She incorrectly assumes the contract is an impenetrable legal fortress. But historical trends in family law reveal a vastly different reality. In modern jurisprudence, a prenuptial agreement is not an absolute, unchallengeable decree. It is a contract, and like any binding contract, it is subject to rigorous legal scrutiny. If Jessica's spouse failed to fully, honestly, and transparently disclose all of his financial assets at the exact time of signing, or if the agreement is deemed unconscionably one-sided by current state standards, a skilled family law attorney might have substantial legal grounds to challenge its validity. Television taught Jessica to surrender immediately to a piece of paper, but an educational approach to modern law teaches her to audit the original contract meticulously with a legal professional. This brings us to the absolute critical step of decoding financial infidelity, a concept that was often played for high drama on nighttime soap operas, but requires cold, methodical, and emotionless analysis today. In the television shows of the 1980s, a wife might discover a secret bank account by conveniently finding a paper statement hidden in a locked mahogany desk drawer. In 2026, financial forensics is entirely digital, and the signs of marital waste or hidden assets are often hiding in plain sight within massive sets of data. You must learn to read the data. Step 1 is establishing the irrefutable baseline of standard marital spending. You absolutely cannot identify a financial anomaly until you deeply understand the routine. This requires legally compiling at least 12 to 24 months of comprehensive banking and credit card statements. You are meticulously looking for the established rhythm of utility payments, grocery bills, mortgage transfers, and typical discretionary spending habits. You must know exactly what it costs to run your household down to the dollar. Step 2 is hunting for the deviations, specifically focusing on the 12 to 18 months preceding the breakdown of the marriage. Has there been a sudden, entirely unexplained decrease in your spouse's direct deposit? Sometimes a spouse preparing for divorce will discreetly ask their employer to defer bonuses, delay commission payouts, or direct a specific portion of their salary into an undisclosed, newly created individual account. Have you noticed an abrupt increase in cash withdrawals at ATMs, particularly those located outside of standard commuting routes or normal working hours? Cash is virtually untraceable once it leaves the machine, making it the primary historical vehicle for marital waste. Step 3 involves scrutinizing the digital footprint of modern convenience. In 2026, hidden spending is rarely a stereotypical briefcase full of money exchanged in a dark alley. It is a recurring microcharge on a mobile payment application. Look for frequent, unexplained transactions on digital platforms, peer-to-peer payment apps, or digital wallets. Scrutinize ride-sharing accounts and modern food delivery services for destination addresses you do not recognize. Examine digital subscription logs for secondary streaming accounts, private servers, or encrypted communication applications that might suggest a hidden parallel life or undisclosed expenditures. Step 4 is understanding the modern frontier of asset concealment, which television from 20 years ago could never have predicted: cryptocurrency and decentralized finance. If your spouse has suddenly developed an intense interest in complex computing hardware, if you see unexplained bank transfers to popular cryptocurrency exchanges, or if you discover hardware wallets resembling simple USB drives hidden in the home, you must alert your legal counsel immediately. Tracing these assets requires specialized forensic accountants, and identifying their existence early is paramount to ensuring an equitable distribution of wealth. The core reason this meticulous process feels so incredibly overwhelming is because American television historically conditioned women to be the emotional victims of betrayal, rather than the forensic investigators of their own financial realities. When a primetime television character was financially betrayed, she threw a glass of wine, slapped a face, and wept dramatically for the camera. She did not immediately subpoena an employer for a complete compensation and deferred bonus package history. But in 2026, the modern family courtroom strictly requires verifiable data, not theatrical drama. You must actively resist the decades of television programming that tells you to rely solely on emotion, and instead adopt the highly calculated mindset of a corporate auditor. Consider the modern case study of a woman we will call Margaret. Margaret noticed her husband was taking frequent, unexplained business trips, a classic trope pulled straight from decades of primetime television. Instead of confronting him in a dramatic, unrecorded, and emotionally exhausting argument, Margaret quietly began cross-referencing his corporate expense reports against their personal joint credit card statements. She discovered that while his company was paying for his standard flights, he was actively using marital funds to upgrade his luxury accommodations and purchase incredibly expensive gifts for a third party. Because Margaret gathered this data systematically and legally before filing any paperwork, her legal team was able to argue successfully for a disproportionate distribution of the remaining marital assets to compensate her fully for the intentional dissipation of funds. She successfully recovered her stolen financial equity solely because she acted like a methodical data analyst, not a reactive soap opera character. Understanding the paper trail is only the preliminary battle in this massive undertaking. Once you have the data, you have to present it effectively, and this is where the lingering influence of American television becomes downright dangerous to your financial future. Shows from the late 90s and early 2000s popularized the archetype of the courtroom bulldog, the aggressively theatrical lawyer who allegedly wins cases by screaming at expert witnesses, intimidating the opposition, and dramatically revealing surprise evidence at the 11th hour. If you hire your legal counsel based on this fictionalized, hyper-aggressive television model, you are almost guaranteeing a protracted, financially devastating litigation process. In the next segment, we are going to completely dismantle the Hollywood myth of the shark attorney. We will expose exactly how litigation abuse is funded, why the lawyer who loudly promises to destroy your ex is actually the greatest threat to your own financial survival, and the specific interview-based steps you must take to hire a legal team that prioritizes your wealth over their ego. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, American television networks discovered a highly profitable formula that would inadvertently sabotage the financial futures of millions of women: the high-stakes courtroom drama. Shows broadcasted during this era flooded our living rooms with a very specific, incredibly damaging archetype of the successful attorney. This was the golden age of the courtroom shark. We watched, captivated week after week, as these fictional lawyers screamed at judges, dramatically ambushed opposing counsel with surprise witnesses, and aggressively dismantled the opposition until they were left weeping on the stand. We were systematically conditioned to believe that loud, aggressive, and relentless combat was the only valid pathway to legal victory. But in the actual family courtrooms of 2026, this television-manufactured archetype is an absolute financial death sentence. If you hire a lawyer who promises to completely destroy your spouse, you are not hiring a protector. You are hiring a financial arsonist, and it is your own marital estate that will burn to the ground. To thoroughly understand why the shark attorney is so exceptionally dangerous, you must understand the underlying business model of family law, a topic entirely ignored by primetime television programming. The vast majority of family law attorneys operate on a billable hour structure. Every single email sent, every phone call answered, every document drafted, and every court appearance made is charged to your retainer in fractional increments of an hour. When an attorney is inherently combative, when they file endless, unnecessary emergency motions, and when they stubbornly refuse to engage in productive mediation, they are actively extending the timeline of your divorce. In legal terms, this is often referred to as litigation abuse. It is a tactic frequently utilized by highly controlling spouses to drain their partner's resources through sheer attrition. But it is equally a tactic utilized by unethical legal counsel to systematically inflate their own billable hours. Historical trends from the last 2 decades clearly demonstrate a direct, undeniable correlation between highly aggressive legal posturing and the massive depletion of the marital estate. The money that should be securing your independent housing in 2026, funding your retirement accounts, and supporting your children's educational future is instead being transferred directly into the bank account of an attorney who is actively performing a television script at your expense. Imagine if you are a woman named Linda, navigating a complex, high-asset separation in 2026. Linda, fueled by betrayal and heavily influenced by years of consuming legal television dramas, purposefully seeks out the most aggressive, loud, and intimidating lawyer in her metropolitan area. Her attorney immediately begins the discovery process not as a fact-finding mission, but as a weapon of harassment. They file dozens of interrogatories, demand years of irrelevant corporate documents, and schedule exhaustive depositions that require hundreds of hours of preparation. They refuse to negotiate on even the smallest logistical details regarding her children's weekend schedules. By the time Linda actually reaches a settlement she likely could have easily achieved 12 months earlier through collaborative mediation, her half of the marital savings has been entirely consumed by exorbitant legal fees. Linda won the emotional, combative battle that television conditioned her to fight, but she entirely lost the long-term financial war of her actual reality. Left with the dramatic story to tell, but zero capital to rebuild her life. You must fundamentally shift your perspective right now. You are not casting a dramatic character for a courtroom television show. You are hiring a chief executive officer to efficiently manage the dissolution of a complex financial partnership. This requires a rigorous, strictly educational approach to interviewing potential legal counsel. Step 1 of this critical process is entirely removing your emotions from the initial consultation. When you sit down with a prospective attorney, you must listen very carefully to the specific language they utilize. If they immediately validate your anger without analyzing the facts, if they promise to make your spouse suffer, or if they guarantee a specific highly lucrative outcome, you must stand up and walk out of that office. These are massive, blinking red flags indicating a lawyer who prioritizes perpetual conflict over efficient resolution. Step 2 involves asking highly specific, data-driven questions regarding their legal strategy and their historical performance in your specific jurisdiction. You must ask them directly. What is your exact philosophy on mediation versus full litigation? What percentage of your current family law cases actually proceed to a full trial? If that percentage is unusually high, they are likely a highly combative attorney who avoids settlement. You need to ask them about their direct experience collaborating with forensic accountants and tracing hidden digital assets, exactly as we discussed in the previous segment. Ask them for a realistic, worst-case scenario analysis of your specific situation. A competent, highly skilled attorney operating in 2026 will never sell you a fantasy. They will present you with cold, hard facts, potential outcomes based strictly on current state statutes, and a clear, pragmatic strategy designed explicitly to minimize your financial exposure and protect your timeline. Step 3 is establishing your own absolute boundaries regarding the preservation of your wealth. You must clearly and firmly communicate to your legal team that your primary objective is a swift, equitable, and financially secure settlement, not a theatrical courtroom victory. You have to be deeply prepared to compromise on the minor emotional points in order to secure the major financial ones. This is incredibly difficult because American television has persistently taught us that compromise is a pathetic form of weakness. In classic dramatic narrative structures, the hero never backs down from a fight. But in the modern family court system, the party who stubbornly refuses to compromise is almost always the party who suffers the most severe financial consequences. You must train yourself to view every single legal decision through the lens of a strict, emotionless cost-benefit analysis. Is fighting over a specific piece of household furniture worth $3,000 in attorney billable hours? The mathematical answer is always no. Consider a counter case study of a woman named Susan. Susan also initiated a separation in 2026, but instead of hiring a combative shark, she deliberately hired a legal firm specializing in collaborative divorce. Her legal team worked in structured tandem with a neutral financial professional and a dedicated family communication specialist. Instead of filing aggressive public motions, they held private, heavily moderated settlement meetings. Susan's team focused entirely on the mathematical reality of dividing the assets equitably and structuring a highly detailed, sustainable co-parenting plan. It was not emotionally satisfying in the way a television drama is designed to be. There were no dramatic speeches, no explosive courtroom reveals, and no tearful confessions on the witness stand. The entire process was heavily bureaucratic, deeply boring, and remarkably efficient. Because Susan actively rejected the television narrative of the courtroom battle, she finalized her divorce in a fraction of the time, retaining over 90% of her entitled marital wealth. We have now completely dismantled the financial mechanics of your divorce, from tracing hidden assets to hiring a legal team that actively protects your wealth rather than draining it. But there is one final, incredibly dangerous element of the American television narrative that we have not yet addressed, and it is the exact psychological weapon your spouse's legal team will eagerly use to destroy your credibility in front of a judge. For decades, daytime television, talk shows, and reality programming have actively conditioned women to express their trauma and frustration in a very specific, highly visible, and volatile manner. In the comfort of your living room, this behavior is viewed as authentic and entirely justified. But in the sterile, unforgiving, and highly judgmental environment of the 2026 family courtroom, this exact same emotional response is legally weaponized to label you as unstable, unreasonable, and unfit. In the next part of this masterclass, we are going to dive deep into the brutal legal reality of the hysterical woman trope, how your own perfectly natural emotional reactions are being actively used against you in modern custody evaluations, and the absolute psychological lockdown you must master before you ever set foot inside a courtroom. The origin of this trap lies in the explosion of daytime television talk shows and reality programming that dominated American media from the late 1980s well into the 2000s. Think about the cultural shift we witnessed. Prior to this era, personal grievances were largely kept behind closed doors. But suddenly, network television began rewarding explosive, highly volatile emotional displays with national attention and audience validation. We watched women confront cheating spouses, deadbeat partners, and manipulative family members on brightly lit sound stages. And when they screamed, cried, or threw chairs, the studio audience erupted in applause. The cultural narrative shifted from quiet endurance to aggressive confrontation, branding this emotional dysregulation as living your truth or finally standing up for yourself. This television genre successfully trained entire generations of American women to believe that if you simply express your pain loudly enough and passionately enough, a figure of authority will step in, validate your suffering, and punish the wrongdoer. But in the incredibly sterile, bureaucratic environment of a 2026 family courtroom, there is no studio audience, and the judge is not a daytime talk show host. When you bring that conditioned, highly televised emotional reactivity into a modern legal setting, you are walking directly into a trap intentionally set by opposing counsel. This is where historical trends in custody evaluations become absolutely critical to understand. Modern psychological evaluations in court-appointed mediation sessions place a massive premium on stability, predictability, and emotional regulation. If your spouse's attorney can successfully goad you into sending a furious, deeply emotional text message at midnight, or if they can trigger you into crying uncontrollably during a deposition, they will not present this to the judge as the natural reaction of a traumatized woman. They will systematically frame it as documented proof of your fundamental instability. They will use your completely understandable anger to project the hysterical woman trope onto you, arguing that if you cannot control your emotions in a controlled legal setting, you are entirely unfit to maintain primary custody of your children. Imagine if you are Rachel, a mother of two currently enduring a highly contentious custody battle in 2026. Her ex-husband frequently violates minor elements of their temporary parenting schedule, bringing the children back an hour late or conveniently forgetting to pack their sports equipment. Rachel, operating under the television-conditioned belief that she must constantly defend her boundaries with loud, immediate confrontation, sends him a barrage of long, angry, deeply emotional text messages detailing exactly how selfish and narcissistic he is being. She believes she is documenting his bad behavior. But when the court date arrives, her husband's legal team does not talk about the late drop-offs. Instead, they print out hundreds of pages of Rachel's furious, multi-paragraph text messages and submit them as Exhibit A. They paint Rachel as a deeply hostile co-parent who is obsessed with conflict and incapable of peaceful communication. The judge, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of Rachel's emotional outbursts, entirely ignores the husband's underlying provocations and strictly reprimands Rachel for failing to foster a healthy parallel parenting environment. Rachel loses significant custody time not because she was a bad mother, but because she failed to understand that the medium is the message, and emotional text messages are legal poison. To survive this exact scenario, you must initiate what we call a total psychological lockdown. This requires entirely unlearning the media-driven impulse to react and replacing it with a cold, calculated, corporate communication strategy. Step 1 of this lockdown is strictly adopting the business mindset. From the moment you file for separation, you must treat your spouse not as a former romantic partner who betrayed you, but as a hostile corporate vendor with whom you are forced to manage a joint logistical project, that project being the raising of your children. You do not send emotional paragraphs to a difficult vendor. You send brief, factual, and strictly logistical updates. This is legally known as the BIF method of communication, meaning every single interaction must be brief, informative, friendly, and firm. If your spouse sends you a highly manipulative, triggering email designed explicitly to start a fight, you do not defend yourself. You do not correct their false narrative. You scan the email for a logistical question, and you reply exclusively to that logistical question, using no more than 2 sentences. Step 2 of the psychological lockdown is the absolute mastery of the gray rock method. When you are forced to interact with your spouse in person, during custody exchanges or mandatory mediations, you must make yourself as fundamentally uninteresting and emotionally unresponsive as a gray rock. Television has conditioned us to read body language and respond to micro-expressions, but in 2026, your survival depends on becoming a blank slate. If your spouse attempts to provoke you with an insult, your legal response is a blank stare and a slow nod. You offer 0 facial expressions, 0 changes in your vocal tone, and 0 emotional fuel. Controlling spouses rely on your emotional reactivity to justify their own abusive behavior to the court. When you entirely remove that reaction, their attempts to manipulate you become glaringly obvious to any trained custody evaluator or judge observing the interaction. You must understand that in the modern legal arena, silence is not submission. Silence is the ultimate assertion of absolute control over your own legal narrative. Step 3 involves securing an independent, confidential space to process the massive psychological toll this lockdown requires. Because you are meticulously suppressing your natural human reactions for the sake of your legal survival, you must have a secure outlet. This does not mean venting to your children, which courts view as parental alienation, nor does it mean posting vague, passive-aggressive quotes on social media, which opposing counsel will instantly screenshot and submit as evidence of your mental state. It means securing a licensed, board-certified trauma therapist who operates entirely outside of the court's jurisdiction. This professional team member is not a luxury. They are a strategic necessity designed to keep your mind sharp and your legal communication flawlessly sterile. You are effectively training yourself to operate as a completely emotionless entity on the public record, while protecting your humanity in private. But keeping your emotions off the public record is only half of the modern battle. We have addressed the physical courtroom in your direct communication, but we have not yet touched the most pervasive and legally devastating surveillance tool in existence today. In 2026, the walls of your home, the devices in your pocket, and the very algorithms that govern your daily digital life are quietly gathering an ocean of metadata that can, and absolutely will, be subpoenaed by a highly motivated legal team. In the next chapter of this masterclass, we are going completely off the grid to expose exactly how your smart home devices, your vehicle's navigation system, and your seemingly innocent online shopping habits are being weaponized in modern asset discovery, and the immediate step-by-step digital blackout you must execute tonight to protect your privacy and your future. In the mid-20th century, the American television audience was captivated by the archetype of the private investigator. Shows like The Rockford Files, Columbo, and Magnum, P.I. established a very specific cultural expectation of how marital secrets were uncovered. In these narratives, a man in a trench coat would sit in a darkened sedan, utilizing high-powered binoculars and a film camera to document a spouse's indiscretions. Surveillance was a physical, labor-intensive, and highly expensive process that required a human being to be physically present at a specific location. If you are approaching your divorce in 2026 with this outdated television mindset, you are profoundly vulnerable. The guy in the trench coat has been replaced by a silent, invisible, and ubiquitous network of sensors that you likely purchased, installed, and currently carry in your pocket every single day. We have moved from the era of the private eye to the era of the digital breadcrumb, and your ignorance of this shift is the primary weapon your spouse's legal team will use to dismantle your privacy and your financial claims. Imagine if you are Kim, a woman in a high-conflict separation in the year 2026. Kim has done everything right according to the old television scripts. She has changed her locks, she has stopped speaking to her husband's friends, and she is careful about who she meets in public. However, Kim's home is a modern smart home. Her refrigerator, her thermostat, her doorbell, and even her window blinds are connected to a central hub that her husband, an IT professional, originally configured. While Kim thinks she is alone, her husband is sitting in a temporary apartment, pulling JSON logs from the cloud that show exactly when Kim enters and leaves the house, what time she wakes up in the morning based on the coffee maker's activation, and how many people are in the house based on the fluctuations in the Wi-Fi signal's data load. In 2026, the Internet of Things is not just a convenience. It is a 24-hour witness that never sleeps and never forgets. Historical trends in digital forensics show that data from smart home devices is increasingly being subpoenaed in family law cases to prove or disprove residency, to document the presence of unauthorized overnight guests, or to establish a pattern of neglect or lifestyle that contradicts a party's sworn testimony. The educational reality of modern surveillance is that your most dangerous witness is your own smartphone. In the television dramas of the early 2000s, a character might get caught because they left an incriminating text message open on their flip phone. In 2026, the surveillance is systemic. Consider the metadata attached to every single digital action you take. When you take a photograph with your phone and send it via an encrypted app, the image itself might be secure, but the EXIF data, the exchangeable image file format, often contains the precise GPS coordinates of where the photo was taken, the exact timestamp, and the device ID. If Kim sends a photo of a new apartment she is looking at to a friend, and that friend's device is compromised or shared, her husband now has the exact location of her potential new residence. Furthermore, your vehicle is a rolling data logger. Modern automotive telematics systems record everything from your average speed and braking patterns to your precise GPS history. In 2026, many vehicles are equipped with built-in cellular connections that upload this data to the manufacturer's cloud in real time. If your name is on a joint lease or if your spouse has access to the vehicle's connected app, they can see exactly where you have parked, how long you stayed there, and even the weight of the occupants in the seats. This is not science fiction. This is the standard operating environment of the American legal system today. To protect yourself, you must execute a comprehensive, step-by-step digital blackout. This is the fourth pillar of our masterclass, the technical defense of the marital estate. Step 1 is the immediate audit of all shared cloud architecture. In the 1990s, you shared a bank account. In 2026, you share a digital soul. You must assume that any device logged into a shared iCloud, Google, or Microsoft account is a direct mirror of your private life. You must immediately create a new, entirely independent email address that has never been linked to your marital life. This address will be the foundation for your new digital identity. Step 2 is the systematic migration of your two-factor authentication. Most women make the mistake of changing their passwords, but keeping their old phone number as the recovery method. If your spouse has access to the family mobile plan, they can often intercept SMS recovery codes, or even use a feature called SIM swapping to gain total control over your accounts. You must move your two-factor authentication to a standalone app like an authenticator that is not tied to a phone number, or better yet, a physical security key. Step 3 involves the physical inspection of your environment for stalking technology. The rise of low-cost, long battery life tracking tags has revolutionized domestic surveillance. These devices are small enough to be hidden inside the lining of a child's backpack, under a car's bumper, or even inside the heel of a shoe. In 2026, you must utilize specialized scanning software to detect the Bluetooth pings of unrecognized trackers. If you find one, do not simply throw it away. In an educational context, it is important to know that this device is physical evidence. Consult with your legal team about documenting its presence through a police report before you disable it. Step 4 is the management of your digital reputation. Television has taught us that the only thing that matters is the truth, but in the court of 2026, the perception of the digital record is often more influential than the reality behind it. You must assume that every single online purchase, every ride-sharing destination, and every social media interaction is being logged and categorized by an AI-driven discovery tool. If you are claiming financial hardship while your Amazon history shows a surge in luxury purchases, or if you are claiming to be a primary caregiver while your Uber history shows you at a nightclub until 3 in the morning, the data will speak louder than your testimony. You must cultivate a digital life that is as boring, predictable, and legally defensible as a corporate ledger. This level of digital hygiene is exhausting, and it often feels like you are living in a paranoid thriller. But the historical data from the last 5 years of family law litigation shows that women who fail to secure their digital perimeter are significantly more likely to face invasive discovery, character assassination, and the loss of leverage during settlement negotiations. Your spouse's attorney is hoping you stay stuck in the world of 1970s television, thinking that as long as there is no guy in a trench coat, you are safe. They are waiting for you to trip over a digital breadcrumb that you didn't even know you were leaving. By securing your digital life, you are finally closing the door on the era of surveillance. But as you sit in your newly secured digital fortress, a new and perhaps even more terrifying question begins to emerge. Now that you have the data, and now that you have the privacy, what is the actual math of your future? For decades, American television has sold a very specific lie about the financial windfall of divorce. We have been conditioned by the opulent lifestyles of divorced characters in primetime dramas to believe that spousal support is a permanent ticket to a life of leisure. In the next part of this deep dive, we are going to ruthlessly deconstruct the alimony myth. We will analyze the historical shift from permanent alimony to the brutal reality of rehabilitative support, and why the television shows of your youth have dangerously inflated your expectations of what the court will actually order in 2026. We will look at the exact spreadsheets the judges use and why your greatest financial threat isn't your ex-husband. It's your own misunderstanding of the law. The Great American Alimony Myth is perhaps the most dangerous and universally misunderstood concept, inherited from 20th century television programming. If you consumed media in the 1980s and 1990s, you were inundated with a very specific, highly glamorized archetype of the wealthy divorcee. Primetime soap operas and blockbuster films repeatedly showcased women who, after discovering their husband's infidelity, were awarded permanent, exorbitant financial settlements that funded a lifetime of country club memberships, luxury vehicles, and sprawling estates. We were taught by television executives that a marriage certificate was an irrevocable insurance policy, and that a divorce decree was the equivalent of a winning lottery ticket. This broadcasted fiction created a massive, devastating blind spot for generations of women. You enter the legal system of 2026 expecting the court to punish your spouse for their moral failings by awarding you a lifelong pension. But the family court system does not care about the dramatic plot twists of your marriage. The family court system only cares about the mathematical spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is strictly designed to sever the financial ties between you and your spouse as rapidly and efficiently as legally possible. To understand your true financial trajectory, you must completely erase the television concept of permanent alimony from your mind. Historical trends in family law demonstrate a massive nationwide legislative shift away from lifelong spousal support. In the 1970s, permanent alimony was frequently awarded because women were systematically excluded from high-earning professional fields, an inequality that television both reflected and reinforced. But as the decades progressed and women entered the workforce in record numbers, the legal statutes evolved dramatically. In the legal landscape of 2026, permanent alimony is an extreme anomaly, typically reserved only for marriages exceeding 25 years where one spouse has a documented, severe physical or cognitive disability that entirely prevents them from securing employment. For the vast majority of American women navigating a divorce today, the legal standard is not permanent alimony. It is rehabilitative maintenance. This is a temporary, highly conditional, and strictly time-limited financial bridge designed solely to keep you off state assistance while you immediately re-enter the workforce or acquire the vocational training necessary to become completely self-sustaining. Imagine if you are a woman named Catherine, currently separating from your spouse in 2026. Catherine has been married for 14 years. She stepped away from her career in corporate marketing a decade ago to raise their 3 children and manage the domestic sphere, exactly as the traditional television narrative suggested she should as a dedicated mother. Because she caught her husband hiding significant marital assets, Catherine naturally assumes the judge will force him to maintain her current standard of living indefinitely as a form of financial justice. She walks into her initial legal mediation expecting a lifelong monthly deposit. Instead, her attorney pulls out a state-mandated algorithmic software program. In modern family law, your financial future is largely dictated by a rigid, unemotional calculator. The attorney inputs Catherine's historical earning capacity, her husband's current gross income, the mandatory state tax deductions, and the exact duration of the marriage down to the day. The algorithm outputs a highly sobering reality. Because the marriage lasted 14 years, the state guidelines dictate that Catherine is eligible for spousal support for exactly 40% of the length of the marriage. That equals roughly 5.5 years of financial assistance. Furthermore, the amount she receives is not designed to replicate her wealthy married lifestyle. The spreadsheet calculates a percentage of the difference between their two incomes, often capping the total transfer of wealth to ensure the primary earner maintains their own household. The result is a monthly payment that barely covers Catherine's new, independent housing costs and basic utilities. Catherine is completely paralyzed by this revelation because television never showed the glamorous protagonist sitting at a kitchen table, desperately scrolling through entry-level job postings at 45 years old. The rehabilitative maintenance she receives is a literal ticking clock. The court explicitly expects Catherine to use those 5.5 years to update her professional resume, recertify her industry credentials, and secure full-time, robust employment. If she reaches the end of that statutory term and she is still unemployed, the financial support stops entirely, regardless of her distress. The court will not grant an extension simply because she failed to secure a high-paying position, or because the job market is difficult. This is the brutal, hidden reality of the 2026 family law system that completely contradicts 50 years of American broadcasting. This brings us to the deeply uncomfortable, necessary educational step of understanding your own market value in the modern economy. You cannot base your future financial security on the blind hope that a judge will feel sorry for you or view you as a victim. You must execute a highly proactive, aggressive strategy to maximize your earning potential before the ink on your divorce decree is even dry. Step 1 is the immediate initiation of a comprehensive vocational assessment. Do not wait for your spouse's legal team to demand this. You must take ownership of the narrative. A vocational expert is a specialized professional who systematically analyzes your educational background, your past work experience, your physical capabilities, and the current economic labor market in your specific geographic region to determine exactly what your current earning capacity is in 2026. This data provides you with an undeniable, court-admissible baseline. It legally proves to the judge exactly how much money you can realistically earn based on hard data, which entirely prevents your spouse from arguing that you should immediately be making a six-figure salary simply because you have a college degree from 20 years ago. Step 2 is utilizing the rehabilitative maintenance period exactly as the court intends. You must view this temporary alimony not as disposable income for your lifestyle, but as strict venture capital for the relaunch of your professional life. Educational analysis of historical case studies involving women who successfully navigated this complex transition shows that they did not wait for inspiration. They immediately enrolled in targeted, accelerated certification programs in high-demand, stable fields such as digital data analytics, healthcare administration, or technical project management. They did not attempt to perfectly recreate their former domestic lives. They aggressively pivoted to entirely new, financially stable independent identities. Furthermore, you must meticulously document every single job application you submit, every professional networking event you attend, and every educational milestone you achieve during this rehabilitative period. Why is this documentation so critical? Because highly controlling spouses frequently file post-judgment motions attempting to terminate alimony early, aggressively claiming that the receiving spouse is intentionally remaining unemployed to live off their labor. Your heavily documented, relentless pursuit of employment and education is your absolute legal shield against these predatory legal tactics. You must ruthlessly audit your own expectations tonight. The television shows you watched presented a fictional world where the legal system provided infinite protection and endless financial retribution against bad husbands. The reality of 2026 is an algorithmic, state-funded machine that demands your immediate return to the capitalist workforce. You are not a helpless character waiting to be saved by a dramatic courtroom verdict. You are the chief executive officer of your own newly formed independent enterprise. But as you prepare to re-enter the labor market and accurately calculate your exact future earnings, there is a sinister, highly aggressive legal maneuver that opposing counsel is actively preparing to use against you right this minute. It is a mathematical weapon designed to slash your child support, completely eliminate your temporary alimony, and force you into immediate poverty. It happens entirely on paper, and if you do not know how to defend against it, the judge will sign off on it without a second thought. In the next part of this deep dive, we are going to expose the terrifying legal concept of imputed income, how your spouse's attorney will attempt to magically invent a phantom salary for you out of thin air, and the specific undeniable evidence you must gather right now to prove that their numbers are entirely fictitious. The concept is legally known as imputed income, and its rampant abuse in the modern family court system is a direct descendant of the aggressive career woman tropes popularized by television programming in the late 1990s and early 2000s. We all watched those critically acclaimed legal and medical dramas where a brilliant woman, who had stepped away from her high-powered career for a decade to raise a family, miraculously returned to the workforce and was instantly handed a senior partnership or a chief of surgery position by the end of a 45-minute episode. Television made the professional comeback look absolutely seamless, driven entirely by grit, a sharp wardrobe, and a montage of late-night studying. But in the actual legal reality of 2026, opposing counsel relies completely on this deeply internalized societal bias. They walk into the courtroom and aggressively argue that because you hold a master's degree from 15 years ago, or because you previously managed a corporate department before your children were born, you possess the immediate, unhindered ability to walk out of the courthouse and instantly secure a six-figure salary. They are actively weaponizing your past achievements against your present reality to fundamentally alter the mathematical formula of your survival. When a judge imputes income to you, they are essentially writing a phantom salary into the state-mandated support algorithm. They are calculating your child support and your rehabilitative maintenance as if you are already cashing a substantial paycheck every 2 weeks, regardless of the fact that your actual bank account is completely empty. If your husband earns $150,000 a year, and the judge agrees with his attorney to impute an income of $80,000 to you based on your outdated resume, the court only calculates support based on the $70,000 difference. Opposing counsel does this strictly to starve you out. They know that if they can successfully attribute a massive, fictitious earning capacity to you, the temporary spousal support you desperately need to survive the transition will be drastically reduced or entirely eliminated. This is not a mistake. It is a highly calculated litigation strategy, designed to force you into accepting a terrible settlement simply because you cannot afford to buy groceries while you wait for a trial date. Imagine if you are Elizabeth, a 48-year-old mother of 3 navigating a highly contentious divorce in 2026. Elizabeth has a background in software project management, but she exited the corporate workforce in 2012 to manage the immense logistical burden of raising her family and supporting her husband's executive career. Her husband's legal team files a motion arguing that Elizabeth should be imputed a salary of $120,000. To the judge, who sees a capable, educated woman, this might sound perfectly reasonable. But the legal team completely ignores the staggering technological acceleration that occurred during Elizabeth's 14-year gap. They ignore the fact that the project management software she utilized is now entirely obsolete, replaced by artificial intelligence integration and automated workflows. They ignore the brutal reality of the 2026 job market, where corporate applicant tracking systems automatically reject resumes with a decade-long employment gap before a human resources representative ever sets eyes on the document. If Elizabeth walks into that courtroom unprepared and relies on the television myth that she can just confidently ask for her old job back, the judge will accept the imputed income, and Elizabeth will be mathematically forced into immediate bankruptcy. To defeat the legal maneuver of imputed income, you must replace the television fantasy with overwhelming, undeniable, and meticulously organized forensic evidence of your actual market value. Step 1 is the immediate creation of the job search ledger. This cannot be a casual list of places you might want to work. It must be a hostile, aggressive documentation of corporate rejection. The moment you understand that divorce is inevitable, you must begin submitting applications to the exact tier of jobs your spouse's attorney claims you can secure. You must submit 10 to 20 applications a week, and you must log every single data point in a centralized spreadsheet. You log the date, the specific corporation, the title of the position, the salary range, the exact platform used to apply, and most importantly, the automated rejection emails you inevitably receive. You must compile hundreds of these documented rejections, When your spouse's attorney stands up and dramatically claims you can easily earn $100,000, your attorney will present a binder containing 200 verifiable rejections for exactly those positions, legally proving to the judge that the opposing counsel claims are entirely fabricated. Step 2 involves countering their theoretical data with your own localized, highly specific vocational evaluation. We touched on this previously, but the defense against imputed income requires a distinctly aggressive application of this tool. Your spouse's attorney will likely use generic data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics to justify the phantom salary. They will point to a chart and say that the average marketing director in your city makes a certain amount. You must retain a vocational expert who understands the algorithmic hiring practices of 2026. Your expert must conduct a labor market survey specifically targeted to women with a 10-year employment gap in your exact zip code. They must produce a binding legal report stating that without 12 to 18 months of specific, full-time technological retraining and certification, your actual realizable earning capacity is minimum wage. You fight their theoretical national averages with your hyperlocal individualized reality. Step 3 is calculating and aggressively presenting the devastating cost of immediate re-entry. If the judge is leaning toward imputing an income to you, you must immediately introduce the mathematical reality of working in 2026 as a single mother. You must secure formal written quotes from 3 different local childcare facilities, including before and after school care, as well as the cost of dedicated summer programs. You must calculate the exact cost of a daily commute, the required professional wardrobe updates, and the shift in your tax bracket. Often, when you subtract the absolute, non-negotiable costs of working from the phantom salary they are attempting to impute, the net financial gain is 0 or even negative. By forcing the court to examine the granular, step-by-step financial logistics of your re-entry into the workforce, you dismantle the glossy, television-inspired narrative that working immediately solves all of your financial problems. You force the judge to see that imputing income without an adequate rehabilitative timeline actually damages the financial stability of the children they are sworn to protect. You have now secured your digital privacy, you have audited your true marital assets, and you have built an impenetrable fortress of evidence against the weaponized use of imputed income. You are thinking like a corporate strategist rather than a daytime talk show guest, and your legal foundation is becoming undeniably strong. But there is one massive, deeply emotional asset sitting directly in the center of your marital spreadsheet, and it is the exact asset that decades of family television programming has conditioned you to fight for at all costs. It is the ultimate symbol of maternal success, domestic stability, and the American dream. I am talking about the family home. In the next part of this deep dive masterclass, we are going to brutally dissect the psychological trap of real estate in modern divorce. We will uncover exactly why fighting to keep the house is mathematically the single greatest wealth-destroying mistake a woman can make in the year 2026, and how the nostalgic pull of your children's childhood bedrooms is actively being used by your spouse to negotiate away your vital retirement savings. The American television landscape of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s was built upon the visual foundation of the suburban single-family home. From the white picket fences of fictional towns like Mayfield to the split-level architectural stability of the Brady household, the home was never just a building. It was a character in itself. It represented the ultimate prize of the American dream, a symbol of domestic success, and most importantly for women, a physical manifestation of safety and social standing. We were programmed through thousands of hours of domestic sitcoms to believe that as long as the mother kept the house, the children would remain psychologically unscathed and the family's core identity would remain intact. This specific media-driven obsession has created what modern financial forensic experts call the house trap, a psychological and mathematical sinkhole that is currently being used to systematically strip American women of their long-term financial independence in the year 2026. To navigate this trap, we must first deconstruct the primary negotiation tactic used by high-conflict spouses. Imagine if you are Maria, a woman living in a high-tax state like New York or California in 2026. During the initial settlement discussions, Maria's husband, perhaps sensing her deep emotional attachment to the family home and her desire to maintain stability for their teenagers, makes a seemingly generous offer. He suggests that Maria keep the house and its $400,000 in equity, while he keeps his retirement accounts, his pension, and the liquid brokerage accounts which happen to total a similar $400,000. To a woman conditioned by television to prioritize the immediate domestic environment, this looks like an equitable 50-50 split. But in the cold, algorithmic reality of 2026, Maria is actually agreeing to a deal that will likely lead to her financial ruin within the next decade. Step by step, we must perform a ruthless financial audit of the family home versus liquid retirement assets. First, you must account for the liquidity factor. The $400,000 in a retirement account is a productive asset. It is invested in diversified markets and, based on historical trends of the S&P 500, it has the potential to grow compoundly over time without requiring any additional capital from you. Conversely, the $400,000 in home equity is a stagnant, illiquid asset. You cannot eat your kitchen cabinets, and you cannot pay for a child's college tuition with a bathroom vanity. To access that money, you must either sell the home, incurring massive transactional costs, or take out a home equity line of credit, which in the high interest rate environment of 2026, is an incredibly expensive form of debt. Second, we must examine the hidden costs of ownership that television shows like Home Improvement or Property Brothers conveniently gloss over. When you keep the house, you are also keeping 100% of the liability for property taxes, which in 2026 have spiked significantly due to recent municipal reassessments. You are responsible for 100% of the homeowner's insurance premiums, which are currently at historic highs due to climate-related risk modeling. You are responsible for the deferred maintenance, the roof that will need replacing in 3 years, the HVAC system that is nearing the end of its life cycle, and the general upkeep that previously consumed 2 incomes. Educational data on post-divorce transitions indicates that women who keep the house often spend upwards of 30 to 40% of their net monthly income just on housing-related carry costs, leaving them zero room for retirement contributions or emergency savings. Third, you must calculate the terrifying reality of the capital gains tax. Under current United States tax law, specifically Section 121, a married couple filing jointly can exclude up to $500,000 of gain on the sale of a primary residence. However, once you are divorced and filing as a single taxpayer, that exclusion is slashed in half to $250,000. If Maria keeps the house and stays in it for 10 years while it appreciates, and then eventually tries to downsize when her children leave, she may face a massive tax bill that her ex-husband entirely avoided by taking the retirement accounts. He received $400,000 in cash equivalent value, while Maria received an asset that she must pay to maintain, pay to sell, and pay the government to exit. This brings us to the 5th pillar of our masterclass, the strategic prioritization of the QDRO, or the Qualified Domestic Relations Order. While television has made the family home the star of the show, the true hero of a woman's financial survival in 2026 is the QDRO. This is a highly specialized legal document that allows for the tax-free transfer of a portion of a spouse's retirement plan, such as a 401k, a 403b, or a defined benefit pension, to an alternate payee, which in this case is you. Historical trends in family law settlements show that women who aggressively negotiate for a higher percentage of the liquid retirement assets via QDRO, even if it means selling the family home and moving into a high-quality rental or a smaller, more manageable condo, emerge 5 years post-divorce with significantly higher net worth and lower stress levels. To execute this pivot, you must detach your identity from the bricks and mortar of your current residence. You must realize that the stability your children need is not found in a specific zip code or a familiar floor plan. It is found in a mother who is not chronically stressed about how she will pay the property taxes. You must sit down with a certified divorce financial analyst and run the numbers out to age 85. Compare the potential outcomes of staying in the house versus selling it, splitting the proceeds, and investing your half into a diversified portfolio. In almost every educational case study involving midlife divorce, the woman who chooses the liquid assets in the QDRO achieves a level of financial autonomy that the housebound woman can only dream of. Your spouse's attorney is counting on your nostalgia. They are counting on you being the mother from a 1980s sitcom who would do anything to keep her kids in their childhood bedrooms. They want you to take the house because it is the easiest way for them to walk away with the real wealth. But you are no longer operating within a television script. You are the lead forensic analyst of your own life. You are going to look at that house not as a home, but as a high-cost, low-yield investment that you are prepared to divest from if the math does not support your future. However, even with the math in your favor and the digital blackout in place, there is a final darker level of this process that no television show has ever dared to portray accurately. It is the moment when the legal papers are served, the mediation fails, and you realize that your spouse has been using a very specific type of psychological warfare to make you believe you are incapable of surviving without them. In the final part of this masterclass, We are going to expose the mechanics of post-separation abuse and the specific, high-stakes tactics of litigation-funded gaslighting. We will provide you with the ultimate exit protocol for the year 2026, including how to rebuild your credit from scratch in a digital-first economy, and how to ensure that your final decree isn't just a piece of paper, but a launchpad for the most powerful and independent era of your life. The psychological warfare of the modern divorce does not end when you physically move out of the family residence. In many complex cases, that is precisely the exact moment it escalates into a highly sophisticated, fully funded campaign of legal attrition. For decades, daytime soap operas and primetime dramas conditioned us to believe that the ultimate climax of a toxic relationship was the dramatic packing of a suitcase and the slamming of a front door. Television taught us that physical distance equals immediate emotional and legal safety. But in the highly connected, highly litigious environment of 2026, physical distance is merely a logistical detail. The modern controlling spouse does not need to be in the same room to abuse you. They will simply use their financial resources to weaponize the family court system against you. This phenomenon is legally recognized as post-separation abuse, and its primary vehicle is litigation-funded gaslighting. This is a strategic, calculated method where an ex-partner utilizes endless frivolous motions, intentional delays, and aggressive legal posturing to completely exhaust your financial retainer and deliberately make you question your own sanity and reality. Imagine if you are a woman named Amanda, navigating the dissolution of a 15-year marriage in 2026. Amanda did everything correctly according to the modern educational frameworks. She secured her digital privacy, she hired a collaborative attorney, and she moved into an independent apartment. However, her husband, possessing significantly more liquid capital, immediately instructed his combative legal team to file a relentless barrage of emergency ex parte motions. He requested sudden modifications to the temporary parenting schedule, based on entirely fabricated safety concerns. He subpoenaed Amanda from her place of employment, demanding years of irrelevant performance reviews to falsely argue that her career made her an unfit mother. He refused to sign standard procedural stipulations, forcing Amanda to pay her attorney to appear in court for minor administrative tasks that should have been resolved in a simple email. This is not a legal strategy designed to reach a fair settlement. This is an intentional, textbook application of financial and psychological torture. The abuser relies on the historical trend that women will eventually surrender their rightful assets and agree to highly unfavorable terms simply to stop the bleeding and end the relentless legal harassment. To survive this, you must absolutely refuse to adopt the television narrative of the broken victim. You must deploy the strict corporate boundaries we discussed earlier, relying entirely on your attorney to filter the noise, and recognizing that every frivolous motion is actually documented evidence of his instability, not yours. Once you successfully navigate the litigation minefield and approach the finalization of your settlement, you face a completely new systemic hurdle that classic television programming never addressed: the complete reconstruction of your independent financial identity in a ruthless, algorithmic economy. In the 1970s, the legislative battle was simply securing the legal right for a woman to open a bank account without a male signature. In 2026, the battle is entirely digital, and your credit score is the absolute most critical metric of your survival. Your credit profile dictates your housing options, the interest rates on your vehicle financing, your insurance premiums, and in many corporate sectors, your ability to secure executive employment. If your controlling spouse intentionally defaults on a joint credit card, stops paying the mortgage on the marital home during the separation, or deliberately drains shared lines of credit, your individual algorithmic profile will be instantly devastated. You cannot walk into a bank in 2026, sit down with a friendly loan officer like in a mid-century sitcom, and explain that the late payments were your ex-husband's fault. The artificial intelligence models underwriting modern finance do not care about your divorce narrative. They only process the mathematical default. Therefore, your exit protocol must include a hyper-aggressive, step-by-step strategy for credit rehabilitation. Step 1 is the immediate, legally documented freezing of all joint credit profiles with the major reporting bureaus the exact moment you establish separation. Step 2 requires you to proactively establish a new, entirely insulated digital banking footprint. Step 3 involves leveraging the highly advanced financial technology ecosystem of 2026. You must bypass traditional credit building methods and utilize modern fintech platforms that allow you to directly report your ongoing utility payments, your digital streaming subscriptions, and your new independent rent payments to the credit bureaus. Educational analysis of alternative credit data shows that incorporating these non-traditional payment histories is the absolute fastest historical method to artificially inflate and stabilize a damaged credit profile post-divorce. Step 4 is securing a high-limit secured credit card and utilizing microtransactions. You do not use this card for debt. You use it as a data generation tool, paying the balance in full every single Friday to prove consistent, unshakable liquidity to the algorithmic lending models tracking your behavior. The final and perhaps most critical failure of the American television narrative is the depiction of the final decree. In the movies, the judge slams the gavel, the protagonist smiles, uplifting music swells, and the story instantly ends. In the legal reality of 2026, the judge signing your divorce decree is not the end of the process. It is merely the opening bell of your administrative restructuring. A divorce decree is not a magical spell. It is a corporate operating agreement, and it is entirely worthless if you do not strictly enforce its provisions. You must immediately execute the qualified domestic relations order to legally transfer your share of the retirement assets before your ex-spouse has the opportunity to withdraw or hide those funds. You must actively work with your legal team to ensure that real estate deeds are properly recorded with the county clerk, and that vehicle titles are cleanly transferred into your sole name to prevent future liability issues. Furthermore, you must immediately remove your ex-spouse as the primary beneficiary on your life insurance policies, your corporate retirement accounts, your healthcare directives, and your estate planning documents. Historical case studies are filled with tragic scenarios where women fought for years to secure a fair settlement, only to pass away unexpectedly a decade later, and have their entire rebuilt wealth legally transferred directly back to their abusive ex-husband simply because they forgot to update a single piece of digital paperwork. You must view the final decree as a highly detailed checklist of vital administrative tasks that must be executed with extreme prejudice within 30 days of the judge's signature. Every single loose end is a potential vulnerability, and your ultimate goal is to completely sever the financial and legal arteries that once connected you to your former spouse. You are not walking away from a marriage. You are launching a sovereign, fully independent financial enterprise. By stripping away the decades of toxic television programming that taught you to be quiet, submissive, and financially illiterate, you have reclaimed absolute control over your assets, your children's future, and your own psychological peace. You have mastered the digital blackout, you have defeated the imputed income trap, and you have survived the brutal gauntlet of litigation abuse. You are walking out of that courthouse in 2026 as an impenetrable fortress of data, logic, and self-preservation. But as you sign those final papers and step into your new life, there is an entirely new, highly sophisticated industry waiting for you outside the courthouse doors. Once your assets are secured and you enter the modern, algorithmic dating market as a wealthy, independent single woman, you become the primary target for a completely new breed of financial predator. In our next investigation, we are going to expose the highly lucrative, deeply manipulative ecosystem of modern romance scams, how artificial intelligence is being used to perfectly replicate the exact emotional validation you lacked in your marriage, and the extreme vetting protocols you must deploy to ensure no one ever gains access to your hard-earned empire again.